Welcome back to Saruwatari Xtreme. I'm still working through all of your questions, but I feel like we're making some good progress. So Rami, your question, what is the history of the shop? The shop definitely was a farm shop. My grandfather built it with my dad. It's been here quite some time, and it was definitely used on all farm equipment. However, as we know, unfortunately for my dad, he had this son that's just a little bit out of control and possibly a little delusional when it comes to performance, unfortunately for him. So as time went on, and you guys already all know the story, because I've told you about my racing career, the shop has been slowly converted. So as you can see, everything kind of got moved to the opposite end. This used to be all farm equipment. It was all moved down there for all the cars. There was no lift here originally. The lift was put in. And then, as time went on, I needed more and more room. And as I needed more room, more tractors got put outside. And then more flooring was put in. More racks were put in because all of the cars had more parts to house more engines. Upstairs, more racks were put in up there. The whole shop has had a pretty much makeover since it was originally put together, but it was always farm equipment. When I started doing a lot of engine work, it became evident that one problem of the farm is dust. So my parents were nice enough to equip the shop with a full AC heating system that uses HEPA filters to purify the air. Therefore now, dust is at a minimum in here so I can do engine builds without worrying about contamination. Rami, as far as your question, what do I eat for breakfast? That is an easy question, and that is why I love that question. Anything I can find, and sometimes I eat nothing, depending on how far behind I am on my work. But you could see here that my parents stocked the shop quite heavily with tons of food, not including the 2 refrigerators and freezers we have. I pretty much live at the shop, so I will eat anything I can find. Even here is my daughter Natalia's baby food, and in an emergency situation, I will even eat that. But the truth of the matter is, what is my flavor of choice? Breakfast of champions. I usually take around 14 to 16 cups of coffee a day to keep the schedule I keep. And that is a little extreme, but that will also explain why I've ended up in the hospital several times. My friend, son of Chogokin, and I hope I am pronouncing that right. If I'm not, please correct me down below in the comments. You officially have the most unique name that I've seen on the channel, and I looked it up and it looks like it's some sort of fictitious super alloy possibly? I'm assuming you're a fan of anime, but in any case, to your question, which to me is pretty much the worst question anyone asks. And the reason being, it probably is in line with me asking you which of your twin boys you like better. But let's take a look at what he had to say. Which do you like better out of the X or the 7? Boy, man, talk about difficult. One of my 3 children, I guess I should say. But the answer really comes down to this. In my opinion, the first is always the best. And I'll leave it at that. A few questions on the 7 also came in. So we want to definitely cover that to take care of you as we kind of move forward here. The first question came in from my good friend Exhausted, which was a very good question, and that question pertained to the transmission. He was wondering if I'm going to go ahead and use the G-force transmission to get the car up and running, and if I'm going to leave the G-force transmission in it. So let's talk for a minute about the G-force transmission. Now I know a lot of you are professional drag racers and you all know about it, but also we have a lot of people that are new to the channel, so let's inform them as well. The G-force transmission is a sequential shift 5-speed. Okay, so you can take a look at it here in the 7 and look at that shifter. It is a clutchless transmission, so I use the clutch to engage first gear and then just pull and push through the gears. It's a ratcheting motion, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. 5th gear actually does lock in, so when you let off the accelerator, it stays in 5th. The difficult part about the G-force, using it for anything other than drag racing, is gears 1 through 4, when you lift off the accelerator, it wants to pop into neutral. Now some of us, who don't do what we're always supposed to, can actually hold it into gear at the strip, and it will actually work. But as far as driving around the street, I'm sure you can imagine coming to each stop sign, stop light, the transmission going into neutral, then having to get back into gear, and just think about the fact if you hit any sort of traffic. It's definitely not the ideal choice for the street. Then we would want to use the factory transmission. Now luckily, when Paul Alabab did all the conversions to the 7, he made it so we could put the factory transmission directly back in the car. But at this current time, I really don't know what the plans are for the car. I was just talking to Abel last night. He was saying, bring it to the track and I'll bring the R100 and we'll reminisce of old times. Now, that does sound appealing and that might be something we're going to do. So if that's the case, we would need the G-force transmission in it. The other thing he had mentioned is that for all of you that know Abel's brother Chato, he's got a phenomenal FD that's been back-halved. It makes mine look like nothing. It is a super, super nice car, insanely clean, and really fast. So he had also mentioned that maybe we might go mess around with that. So until we really know what we're doing, I really don't know what to do. The best thing to do is rebuild the G-force, because when I was racing it at the end, I damaged the sliders and engagement plates, and then it's ready to go. Now, if we determine we're going to do something on the street, because also, as you know, Abel has a plethora of cars. He's got this RX-2 that's just killer. He was telling me, he said he'd love to mess around with the 7 on the street. If that's the case, then at that point, I'll go back to the factory trans. So we'll kind of see how it goes. Now, moving on, my friend Patar, all the way from Indonesia, it's still amazing to me because, as you guys know, when I was racing, the internet was not what it is today, and being connected to people, people in Australia like Brad and Patar, it just still amazes me up here. I guess that's just another sign that I'm getting old. But what Patar asks is, how is it possible, Adam, that the 7 sat so long and it was neglected and nothing was done to it? Well, my friend, the simple answer is out of sight, out of mind. The 7 was in a different building, and unfortunately, it suffered the fate that a lot of my cars do. They just get forgotten. I've got so many cars to deal with that I just never get around to working on them or running them. Now, since this has been such a bit of a disaster, my new strategy is I have a calendar where I keep track of all the cars, at least all of these cars, because I'm tired of going through them as well, even the NSX, my Ferraris. It kind of is like an endless process, and right now there's a laundry list of cars that I need to go through, but this car is actually pushing them back. So I will keep working on it, and that is why it kind of just got left behind. I forgot. So too many things. My memory's not so good, if that makes any sense. And for all of you, as I always advise, keep track of the running times of your car so you won't be in the position that I'm in. And I think that pretty much answers your questions to the best of my ability. The other part of your question, Rami, is somewhat more in depth. What really goes down here at the shop? That's a wide variety of things, and you, my friend, are very perceptive as you see things moving all the time. So as we just jump right into it, my daughter comes here every night, and she's hanging out right there at that table, eating, and I make it a point to spend time with her as much as I can, so I can be possibly a quarter of the father that my dad actually is. And then the next thing that happens is that all the time, all these vehicles are moved in and out and moved into other storage facilities so I can get the big equipment in here. That, like we talked about, is why it's got such a high ceiling, to move the big tractors in here. So they're being worked on around the shooting schedule for the YouTube channel, which is just insane because it takes a ton of time. And as you look, this, of course, looks like a very large warehouse. Well, what you probably don't know is that Drew actually moonlights as a DJ, and she is DJ Speed Racer, so she will have her raves in here. So the other thing we have to do is move all the equipment out because she is quite the wild woman. Then beyond that, up above is been converted in the shop so I can actually stay here and live here. There's been shower facilities added. My parents equipped the shop with everything so I can maintain my residence here. To save time so I don't have to go home and everything, there is pretty much very few evenings that I will even go home. the majority of the time, I stay here all night. That way I can continue getting work done and be as productive as possible. That, of course, is why my daughter has to come here. So the main things are those. Those are things that you'll never see really on the YouTube channel. If we take a look down here, getting to the nuts and bolts things, a few things you might not see or know about is that the shop is equipped with a lot of stuff that just isn't available in our area. So there aren't a lot of people running the type of wheels we run that are reverse mount. So instead of trying to find some place, my good friend Gary Tireman recommended that we just buy our own Hunter tireless, touchless machine, which is why we have all those wheels and tires up there. And what you don't see on the channel is he's here very often flipping things and changing things for me all the time. Of course, the sad part of that story is that we paid a grip for that, and then he got his own machine, so I could have just brought my stuff to him, but you just never know how it's going to go. And you've seen all the machines that we talk about, the mill, lathe, and everything else. Now, these cabinets, I know you're asking about all the toolboxes and cabinets. Well, the cabinets on this side of the shop all store Mazda RX-7 parts, full of engine parts, spare suspension components. Everything that was left from racing the 7 is over here. And on this side of the shop, all of those cabinets are full of NSX components. In these cabinets, you can see there are tons of parts left over from running the X. Amazingly enough, this entire shelf is rod bearings, main bearings, Wiseco pistons, stacks of rings, titanium connecting rods. Everything was kept, I guess, so theoretically we could run the X again if we decided to. The question on tools, maybe this will help some of you out. My personal belief is good mechanic work comes from here. It's in the skills of the mechanic. That's why what you'll see is we have tons of tools here. I'm not afraid to admit, a lot of it's Harbor Freight. We get tools at the most cost-effective place. That might help a lot of you out if you're starting to stock up your garage or putting your own shop together, but it's always been a mistake, in my opinion, to always want only Snap-on. In my opinion, Snap-on is definitely the best, but it's so expensive that when you're putting your shop or your garage together, you should probably consider that. The one thing I will say though, if you're going racing or drifting, the Snap-on tools usually do hold up better. So if you're going to be at a track in the middle of nowhere, then for that, for sure, I'm a proponent. Spend the money to have the best equipment, because when it's midnight and you're fixing your car, you're not going to be able to go and buy another wrench. So something to think about. And yes, Rami, your question, why are there so many toolboxes? Well, because these toolboxes were all made to go into the race trailer, into the rig. So they were rolled in there at the time, and they were made to be tooled identically to what's in the shop. Therefore, whenever I was working out of the trailer or in the shop, it was exactly the same. Okay, guys and gals, after 20-something years, you can imagine that I just don't remember things and have memory lapses. Well, it occurred in this case after the video was done on checking the 7 compression. I had a moment of clarity, and typically when things come back to me, I usually just let it go if I don't think it's very important. But in this particular case, this information would probably be pertinent to some of you. Those of you that already make engines that make around 700 horsepower and have built 50 or 60 engines plus, you probably already know this. But those of you that have street cars or are just getting started, this may help you out. When you have a variance like that, you always want to be paying attention to what's going on. Now, in that particular case, when I said that I've run in the 8s with 55 pounds of compression, that is 55 pounds of compression on all 3 combustion chambers. So when you run in, let's say you have 75, 55, 75 on 2, 55 on 1, you're actually creating an imbalance because the combustion energy is different in that combustion chamber. So therefore it loads differently. The more power you make, the more RPM you run, you'll see it. You'll see it in the rotor bearings and in the main bearings and the run out of the eccentric shaft. And if you're like me, and I was running everything to the limit at that time, if I pushed through and did that quite a bit, it would take out the eccentric shaft. And that's something probably none of you really want to do. Now, that being said, on my race car, that's a bit extreme. Almost 700 horsepower, high RPM. It gets exponentially worse the more power you make and the more RPM you run. So in a street car, you won't see it as much, but the problem is that you want to get as much life as possible to run as many miles as you can. That being said, you want those 3 combustion chambers to be as close as possible, especially on the rear, because like we talked about, the rear is usually the first to go. Now, if it was my street car, if I was driving down the street, I just rebuild. Now, of course, we're going to try and see if the side sealant sticks, but it kind of just depends what your comfort level is. But that's why, of course, I keep a brand new spare engine that Mazda built for me just in case I need to put it in. I don't like to have that on a street car. I want to make sure that everything is as close as possible so I can get as many miles before I'd have to actually pull it. But that is something you should think about if you're working on year 7 or any rotary. That is one thing that tends to cause issues. And well, let's take a look here. So this one right here, obviously I ran quite a bit, and having that issue every now and then pop up took its toll on the eccentric shaft. So if we look here, I had to check in the actual RX-7 service manual, which I haven't pulled out in years, of course, as well, to see that the runout was 2.4 thou, okay? And we can see here, we are way, way beyond that before threshold comes back, right at 3.5, and it's swinging back now. Now, something that a lot of you experienced engine builders already know, that I can let the newcomers know about, I already knew the runout was going to be out. This is why. The eccentric shaft tells a story. So before we even measured the runout, you could see if you look at the rear journal rotor bearing, it's very even. All the wear is even around the entire journal. Now, if we take the location where the runout is out, pushed in, up, over the front, you could see the journal's been loaded really heavily on this side. In fact, if you run your finger there and you're really experienced, you can feel that there's a slight variation there. And you look over here, look at that, that's perfectly even. Now, the difference is that the same problem is, you know the load was coming here from the imbalance. You look at where the main journal is, you could tell it's loaded heavier. You can see the lines right there. And then you look at the other side, it's perfectly polished. Then you look at this side down here, you could see that in the rear on the flywheel side, it's even almost all the way around. So this engine came apart 20 years ago, but I could tell you 100% it was up here. The variance was on this side where there was less compression, and that's what caused that from running it a long time, more than I should have. But most likely I was in the middle of a race and there just was no time to change the engine out. And so you can see, obviously, this one is a no-go. And of course, that's why I have a pile of these out there and new ones ready to go. As now I am getting ready to put together another engine just in case that engine doesn't work. But like I said, that's something I just wanted to touch base that could possibly help all of you out and maybe give you more engine life. And that's the goal, especially, right, any car. You want to just get as much as you can before you have to get back in there. As we wind up everything here in the shop, there are a lot of questions that always come up on the rotary lift. And the rotary lift came about because Gary Tireman was talking to Drew. And unfortunately for me, Drew would always ask me to do work around the house. And as all of you know, I have a bad back, so lifting up wheels and tires was a very convenient way for me to get out of doing work at the house, specifically yard work. Unfortunately, Drew and Gary were talking, and Gary recommended one of these, which does all the work for me. This is great, but a very bad idea for any of you that are in a relationship. And the reason why is, this takes away all excuses for doing housework and yard work. And on that note, I'll see you next time.